Firefighter's hands went still the moment he saw it. He had been mid-sentence, talking to someone beside him, holding a plastic cup of coffee he hadn't touched. Then his eyes dropped to my wrist and everything stopped. The cup tilted slightly. Coffee nearly spilled. He steadied it without looking down because he couldn't look away from my grandfather's pin. "Excuse me," he said. His voice was calm, but something underneath it wasn't. He took one step toward me. "Where did you get that?" The community center behind us was full of noise. Folding tables, casserole dishes, paper plates. A retirement party for the local fire chief, 30 years of service. Someone was laughing too loud near the punch bowl. None of it registered anymore. Just this man, his eyes fixed on the small brass pin clipped to my cardigan, and the way his face had gone the color of old ash. "It was my grandfather's," I said. He set the cup down on the nearest table without looking for it. Missed by an inch. Didn't notice. "What was his name?" he asked. I told him. He closed his eyes for exactly 3 seconds. Then he opened them and said, "We need to talk somewhere quiet." That was the moment I understood that my grandfather, the man my own family had written off as a stubborn, unremarkable old man who wasted the last decade of his life sitting on a porch in rural Ohio, was not the person any of us had believed he was. My grandfather, Raymond, lived alone in a 2-bedroom house outside Mill Haven, Ohio. Population just under 4,000, the kind of place where the diner on Main Street still had a rotating pie display, and everyone recognized your car before they recognized your face. He had lived in that house for as long as I could remember. Same kitchen, same armchair by the window, same vegetable garden he kept going until his knees made it impossible. He worked as a maintenance supervisor at the county water facility for most of his career. Retired at 63. After that, as far as my family was concerned, he mostly just existed. My father had a way of describing him that I didn't question until much later. "Your grandfather is a simple man," he'd say. And not with admiration. More like an explanation for why we didn't visit. More like an explanation for why we didn't visit. More like a reason it was fine to let months pass without a phone call. My mother was kinder in the way she dismissed him. She'd say he was set in his ways or not much of a talker, and then change the subject. She sent him a fruit basket every Christmas. She considered that sufficient. I was the only grandchild who called him with any regularity, and even I let gaps stretch longer than they should have. He always answered on the second ring. He always said it was good to hear from me. He never once said he was lonely, which I think now was its own kind of patience. When he got sick, no one moved quickly. My father said the doctors had it under control. My mother said he had always been tough. My uncle didn't respond to the group text for 4 days. I was finishing my residency in Columbus when his neighbor, a retired schoolteacher named Harriet, called my cell phone on a Tuesday afternoon. "Raymond's been taken to Mill Haven General," she said. "His breathing wasn't right. I don't think anyone's coming." I drove 2 hours on an almost empty tank because I forgot to stop for gas and didn't want to lose the time. He was in a bed near the window when I got there. IV in his arm, oxygen tube under his nose, a monitor beeping at a rate that sounded either reassuring or ominous depending on how much you knew about hospitals, which I knew too much about. He looked smaller than I remembered. Not frail exactly, just compressed, like someone had let a little air out of him. He smiled when I walked in. That same slow, dry smile he'd always had, never wide, never performed. "You didn't have to drive all this way," he said. "I know. Your dad coming." I didn't answer right away. "Ah," he said. Just that. He died 11 days later. Not dramatically. The monitor's rhythm changed sometime before 4 in the morning, and by the time the nurse came in, he was already gone. She told me it looked peaceful. I had gone home to sleep for a few hours and wasn't there, which is something I have not entirely forgiven myself for, even now. The funeral was small enough to feel like an apology. My father came but spent most of the service looking at his phone. My mother cried briefly and then composed herself with the efficiency of someone who had prepared for this. My uncle told a story about my grandfather's meatloaf that got a polite laugh. A few men from the fire department showed up in dress uniform, which surprised me because I hadn't known my grandfather had any connection to the fire department. When I asked my father about it, He shrugged. He volunteered there at some point. Years ago. I stood at the grave and thought about every summer I had spent at his house as a kid. The way he knew the name of every tool in his garage. The way he could fix almost anything without instructions. The way he sat on the porch in the evenings and watched the fields go dark without needing to fill the silence with sound. I hadn't cried yet. I just felt something solid and unmoving in my chest that I couldn't identify. After the service, I went to his house to help clear it out. My father wanted it listed quickly. No sense letting it sit, he said. I didn't argue. Most of what I found was ordinary. Work boots by the back door. A shelf of paperback westerns with cracked spines. A kitchen calendar with nothing written on it but a dentist appointment in March. In the garage, tools organized with a precision that bordered on obsessive, every wrench and socket hanging exactly where it belonged, labeled in his small, careful handwriting. Then I found the lockbox. It was on the top shelf of his bedroom closet, behind a stack of folded flannel shirts. A small metal box, gray, combination lock. I didn't know the combination, but the lock was already open. I don't know if he left it that way on purpose. I thought about that a lot. Inside was a folded letter on official stationery I didn't recognize, a photograph I'd never seen, a small notebook with handwritten entries I couldn't fully decode, and the pin, brass, about the size of a quarter, a stylized flame inside a circle with a number stamped below it. Clean, precise, nothing decorative about it. Not the kind of thing you buy, the kind of thing you're given. I had seen it once before, maybe 20 years ago. He was wearing a flannel shirt with the top 2 buttons open, and I caught a glimpse of it clipped to the inside of his collar. I asked what it was. He touched it once, just briefly, and said, "A reminder." Then he offered me lemonade and the subject was closed. I clipped it to my cardigan without knowing why. It was the only thing in the box I could actually wear. My family didn't ask about it. They didn't ask about the box at all. Within a week, they had a realtor out to the house and my father was talking about market comparables. I drove back to Columbus with the box on my passenger seat and a feeling I couldn't name. Not grief, exactly. More like a door that had been left open, just a crack, and I couldn't decide whether to push it further or walk away. A month passed. A colleague mentioned a retirement party for the county fire chief, a community event, open to medical personnel who worked with first responders. I went because I had nothing else going on that Saturday, and because I had been spending too many evenings alone in my apartment thinking about my grandfather's handwriting in that notebook. I wore the pin without thinking about it. It had become habit by then, the way things do when they're the last piece of someone you're not ready to put down. The community center was warm and a little loud. Long tables, potluck food, people in department shirts, standing around telling stories that started with, "Back when?" I shook hands with people I didn't know and ate a piece of sheet cake and felt very much like someone who had crashed an event where everyone else knew the words to a song she'd never heard. Then I felt someone looking at me. A man, somewhere in his late 60s. Gray at the temples, posture like a flagpole. He was standing near the coffee station with a cup he hadn't touched, and his eyes were fixed on my cardigan. Not my face, not the room, just the pen. He put the cup down and walked toward me the way someone walks when they are trying to appear unhurried and are not succeeding. "Excuse me," he said, and the rest of it followed. His name was Gerald Oates, retired battalion chief, 34 years. He brought me to a hallway off the main room, away from the noise, and he stood with his arms crossed and his jaw working like he was deciding how to start. "That pin," he said. "Where exactly did it come from?" "My grandfather's lockbox, Raymond Kowalski, out of Millhaven." He nodded once, slow. "Raymond." He said the name like he was checking something off a list in his head. "He passed? 6 weeks ago." Gerald was quiet for a moment. "He was a good man," he said. "One of the best we had." "I didn't know he had any connection to the fire department," I said. "My father said he volunteered years ago." Gerald looked at me carefully. "Your family didn't know." It wasn't a question. "Know what?" I asked. He exhaled through his nose. Your grandfather didn't just volunteer, he said. He was part of a mutual aid coordination network. It ran through 3 counties, mostly informal, mostly off the books. When there was a major incident, fire, flood, chemical spill, and the official channels were overwhelmed or compromised, this network activated. Raymond was a node, an anchor point. I stared at him. My grandfather maintained drainage pipes and fixed broken valves at a county water facility. That was his day job, Gerald said quietly. But he had a specific skill set from before. Infrastructure assessment, emergency water routing. He knew how to keep water pressure stable in situations where everything else was falling apart. And a fire event, that's not a small thing. Before? I repeated. Gerald unfolded his arms. Before Millhaven, your grandfather spent 8 years working emergency infrastructure in disaster zones. FEMA adjacent, some federal coordination. Not the kind of work that shows up on a resume in plain language. He came back to Ohio in the mid-90s, took a quiet job, and became the person this region called when things went badly wrong and they needed someone who wouldn't panic. I thought about his garage. The tools hung in exact order. The labels in small, careful print. How many times, I asked, that I know of personally? 6 major incidents in about 15 years? The flooding in 2003 that took out 2 townships. He coordinated water rerouting for 72 hours straight. The chemical plant fire in 2009, he kept the municipal water system from being contaminated when the official lines crossed. There was a winter storm in 2011 that collapsed 2 water mains under a hospital. He drove out in a blizzard and had them patched before the backup generators failed. Gerald paused. People were alive on the other end of those situations who will never know his name. I felt something move through me that I didn't have a word for. That pin, he said, nodding at my cardigan, is issued to network members who complete a full active service cycle. Most of us were told to keep it quiet. Some people didn't even keep the pin. Your grandfather kept his. He told me it was a reminder, I said. Gerald smiled for the first time. Sounds about right. I drove home that night in a state I can only describe as structural. Like someone had removed a wall from a room I thought I understood and revealed the building behind it was 3 times the size. I sat in my apartment and opened the lockbox again. The letter I hadn't been able to place was from a regional emergency management office dated 2011. It was addressed to him by name and used language that was formal and careful and said things like, "Your contribution to the continuity of critical services, and the residents of Hargrove County owe a debt that cannot be fully conveyed." It was signed by someone I didn't recognize. At the bottom, he had written in pencil, very small, filed, "No response needed." The notebook was a log. Dates, times, location codes, brief technical notations. Dry as a manual, but when I cross-referenced a few of the dates against old news articles I found online, I could match them to incidents I remembered hearing about on the radio years ago. A factory fire, a county flood advisory, a winter infrastructure emergency. He'd been there for all of them, noted it in pencil in a wire-bound notebook, filed it, moved on. The photograph was the one I'd never seen. Him, maybe 45, standing in front of a water pumping station somewhere that wasn't Ohio in work gear with 3 other people I didn't recognize. Everyone looked tired. Nobody was smiling. But he was holding a coffee cup and looking at the camera with an expression I recognized. That same dry, steady look he had when he knew something was under control. I sat with these things for a long time. Then I called my father. I didn't start gently. I told him about Gerald, about the network, about the flooding in 2003 and the hospital in 2011. I told him about the log and the letter. I told him about the pin. He was quiet for a long time. "That can't be right," he said finally. He worked at the water facility. He fixed pipes. He fixed pipes during disasters so hospitals didn't lose water pressure, I said. Another silence. "He never said anything," my father said. And the way he said it, not defensive, just confused, like a man trying to recall a conversation that wasn't there, made me feel something I hadn't expected. Not anger. Closer to sadness. No, I said. He didn't. Why wouldn't he say something? I don't know, Dad. Maybe because every time someone brought him up, you changed the subject. He didn't respond to that. I went to see my parents the following weekend. My mother was in the kitchen when I arrived. I put the letter on the table without preamble and watched her read it. Her hands tightened on the paper near the end. Where did you find this? She asked. His lockbox, which was sitting in plain sight on his closet shelf. She read it again. Her face did something complicated. My father came in from the garage. He saw my mother's expression and stopped moving. I told them everything. Gerald, the network, the incidents, the notebook, the photograph, the pin. I laid it out the same way I present findings to colleagues. Clear, factual, no editorializing. Let the information do the work. My father sat down at the kitchen table. He put his hands flat on the surface and looked at them. I used to tell people he retired early and just puttered around the house, he said. I know. I said it like it was nothing. Like he was nothing. You said he was a simple man, I said. You said it like it explained why we didn't need to show up. My mother's eyes were wet. He never asked us to come. He wouldn't, I said. That wasn't who he was. But Harriet called me from next door because no one had checked on him in 3 weeks. No one. 3 weeks, Mom. The kitchen went quiet in a way that had weight to it. My uncle had been standing in the doorway. I hadn't noticed him come in. He stepped into the room with his hands in his pockets. He called me last winter, he said. Asked if I could come out and look at something on his roof. Gutters, I think. I said I'd get to it when the weather broke. He stopped. Weather broke in April. I never went. My mother covered her mouth. He didn't die because he was difficult or because he was far away, I said. He died because we decided, all of us, that he didn't have anything worth our time. We made up a version of him that was easier to ignore, and then we ignored him. No one argued. No one offered a counter. The room just absorbed it. 2 weeks later, I contacted Gerald again. He agreed to meet me at a diner outside Millhaven, halfway between our two cities. He brought a retired colleague named Frank, who had worked alongside my grandfather during the 2003 flooding. Frank was in his early 70s, stocky, careful with his words. He ordered black coffee and kept his hands wrapped around the mug. Raymond was the most unflappable person I've ever worked with, he said. We were dealing with a breach in the main line feeding about 1,200 homes, water everywhere, roads starting to wash. Everyone around him was shouting. He just crouched down, looked at the junction, and said, "Okay, here's what we're going to do." Like it was a math problem. Like panic was in a different language he'd never learned. I thought about the way he used to sit on his porch in the evenings, still, watchful, like he was listening for something the rest of us couldn't hear. He never talked about any of it, I asked. Frank shook his head. That was part of how the network functioned. Low profile, no recognition, no paper trail beyond the internal logs. The whole point was that these people looked ordinary. Raymond was very good at looking ordinary. He was ordinary, Gerald said. That was also just true. He liked Western novels and bad coffee and his vegetable garden. Both things were real. I asked about the federal coordination work before Millhaven. Gerald chose his words carefully. I only know pieces. He had a background in large-scale infrastructure assessment, the kind that gets used after major disasters. Floods, industrial accidents, some international work in the 80s that I don't have details on. He came back to the US and chose a small life, but when the small life needed what he knew, he gave it. Without telling anyone, I said. Without telling anyone, I said. Without telling anyone, Gerald confirmed. On the drive home, I pulled over on the side of a county road and sat in my car for 20 minutes watching a hawk circle over a harvested cornfield. I don't know why. It just seemed necessary. My family held a small gathering a month later. Not a second funeral, just people who knew him at the house in Millhaven before the new owners moved in. My parents came. My uncle came. Harriet came. Gerald and Frank came in plain clothes without ceremony. We sat in the living room and the kitchen and the back porch, and people shared things they remembered. Harriet said he had shoveled her driveway every winter for 9 years without being asked, and always left before she woke up so she couldn't thank him. The man from the hardware store 2 towns over said my grandfather had driven out to help him reset a burst pipe one February morning and refused to take money for it. A woman named Carol, who had lived down the road, said he had fixed her furnace twice, her water heater once, and never mentioned any of it again. Gerald said quietly that the hospital in Hargrove County had never lost water pressure during the 2011 storm, that the patients on the surgical floor had never known anything was wrong, that someone had made sure of that. My father stood near the window with his coffee going cold. He called me once, my father said. His voice was level, but something underneath it wasn't. About 3 years ago, said he was thinking about driving up to Columbus for the weekend. Said maybe we could watch a game. He stopped. I told him it wasn't a great time. We had some things going on. He looked at the floor. I don't even remember what we had going on. No one said anything. I told myself he was fine alone, my father said. I think I just didn't want to feel responsible for fixing it. My mother put her hand on his arm. My uncle said, I should have fixed those gutters. Simple. Quiet. The specific weight of a small, undone thing. I was standing near the door to the garage. Through the window I could see his tool wall. The new owners hadn't taken anything down yet. Every wrench and socket still in its labeled place. I thought about the 2003 flood. 1,200 homes. The hospital in 2011. The patients who never knew the lights had nearly gone out. I thought about how he answered the phone on the second ring and said it was good to hear from me. I thought about how he died at 4 a.m. with a monitor beeping quietly and no one beside him, and how his last act of not causing trouble was probably going without making a sound. I still work in the ER in Columbus. Long shifts, not enough sleep, the particular exhaustion of caring for strangers at their worst moments. But I notice things now that I moved past before. The maintenance worker who shows up at 2 a.m. to fix a flooded utility closet and is back at 6 for his regular shift. The volunteer who staffs the information desk every Saturday and knows the floor plan better than most of the staff. The woman who drops off hand warmers at the ambulance bay every December and never leaves her name. People doing the work that holds everything together. People who have decided that doing it is enough. That the doing is the point. And that recognition was never part of the arrangement they made with themselves. My grandfather lived that way for his entire adult life. Not because no one offered him recognition, because he had decided somewhere along the way that the work mattered more than what people knew about it. That a water line stabilized at 2 a.m. in a snowstorm was its own complete thing, independent of whether anyone ever said thank you. I think about the letter at the bottom of his lockbox, filed, no response needed. That was him. That was the whole of him in pencil, in small handwriting at the bottom of a page. I wear the pin every day, not on the outside of my coat, not somewhere visible. On the inside, where it sits against my shirt, where I can feel the slight weight of it. It reminds me to look. To actually look at the person next to me and ask what they're carrying and mean the question. My mother asked about it recently. We were having dinner, just the two of us, the first dinner we'd had together in years where we weren't using logistics as a reason to meet. Do you still wear it? She said. Yes. Does it make you sad? I thought about his porch in the evenings. The fields going dark. The way he could sit in silence without needing to fill it. No, I said. It makes me pay attention. She nodded slowly. She was quiet for a moment, the way she gets when she's working up to something she means. I want to go back to Millhaven, she said. To the cemetery. Before it gets cold. Okay, I said. I want to bring something from the garden. He used to love tomatoes. She paused. I know it's too late for tomatoes, I just want to bring something that came from growing. We went the following Saturday. My father came, my uncle came. We stood at the grave in the gray November light, and my mother placed a small bundle of late-season herbs she had dried from her garden, tied with a piece of kitchen string. It was not enough. Nothing would be enough. But it was real, and it was done, and I think that mattered in the way that real, done things matter even when they arrive late. My father put his hand on the headstone. He didn't say anything. He just stood there for a long time, his hand flat on the stone, like he was making a promise in a language that didn't need words. I stood a few steps back. The pin pressed lightly against my shirt. The wind came across the open ground and moved through the dry grass at the edge of the cemetery, and somewhere in the middle distance, a crow settled on a fence post and looked at nothing in particular. I thought about 1,200 homes with running water, a hospital that didn't lose pressure, a snowstorm someone drove through at midnight so that people he would never meet could wake up the next morning without knowing how close it had come. I thought about a man who answered on the second ring and always said it was good to hear from me, and never once asked for more than that. I'm still learning how to deserve that kind of patience. If you're listening to this and there's someone in your life like that, someone quiet, someone competent, someone who fixes things before you notice they're broken and never mentions it, I want you to stop what you're doing after this and call them. Not text, call. Ask about their week. Ask what they've been working on. Ask about the thing they fixed last month that you forgot to ask about at the time. Don't wait until you're standing in a diner off a county road hearing about them from a man holding a cold cup of coffee. Don't wait until the lockbox. Thank you for listening. If this story stayed with you, I'd be grateful if you shared it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you want more stories about the people who hold things together without asking to be seen, we'll be here. This is Calm Restraint. We'll see you next time. I've been thinking a lot about cause and effect lately, not in an abstract way. In the specific, concrete way that comes from standing at a cemetery in November, watching your father press his hand against a headstone like he's trying to say something his voice can't carry. My family made a series of small decisions about Raymond Kowalski. None of them felt significant at the time. Don't drive out this weekend. Keep the call short. Tell him you'll fix the gutters when the weather breaks. Each one felt reasonable in isolation. Together, they built a wall between a man and the people who were supposed to know him. And the wall held so long that everyone forgot it was a wall. They just thought that was the distance. That's what I keep coming back to. Not the dramatic failures. The quiet ones. The ones that felt like nothing. There's something I've learned, or maybe relearned from all of this, about what it actually means to be a good person. Not in a general sense. In the day-to-day sense, the Tuesday afternoon sense, the I have 15 minutes and a phone in my hand sense. Being good isn't mostly about the big moments. It's about whether you call back. Whether you show up when it's inconvenient. Whether you ask a question and then actually wait for the answer instead of half listening while you scroll. My grandfather understood this in a way I don't think he ever articulated. He drove out in a blizzard to fix a water main under a hospital. He shoveled a neighbor's driveway for 9 years before dawn so she wouldn't have to ask. He answered on the second ring. Every time. Not because he was trying to be extraordinary, because that was what the situation required and he was the person available to do it. That's a kind of moral intelligence I'm still learning to recognize, let alone practice. And then there's the matter of what it costs to carry something quietly. Gerald told me Raymond never broke discipline. 30-plus years of knowing things he couldn't say, doing work that would never appear on any public record, and choosing every single day to let the ordinary surface of his life be the only thing people saw. That takes a kind of inner steadiness that doesn't come from nowhere. It gets built, maintained, chosen over and over in small moments when no one is watching. I think about that when the ER gets hard. When I'm tired and the shift won't end and the person in front of me needs more than I feel like I have left. I think about a man driving through a snowstorm with a thermos of bad coffee and a notebook full of pencil entries, alone, going toward the problem because he had decided that was who he was. He built that identity over decades of small choices. And I'm building mine right now, in exactly the same way, whether I'm paying attention to it or not. The pin sits against my shirt every day. I feel it when I move. It doesn't let me forget that the question isn't whether I'll be needed. It's whether I'll show up before someone has to call a neighbor to do it for me.